Welcome to our kickoff. For today's kickoff, you're going to meet the project team. We'll do a quick corridor plan 101, learn about why Rio Road was selected for the new plan, and we'll share our approach to the project. Then we'll get into the current conditions of the Rio corridor, followed by ways you can get involved in the project and a quick Q&A. But before that, I'd like to share some quick tips about Zoom for anyone who hasn't had a chance to experience a virtual meeting on this platform. Today will be primarily presentation-based with some time reserved for questions at the end. For those of you viewing this by computer, tablet, or smartphone, you'll see a Q&A icon in the webinar toolbar located at the bottom of your screen. During the presentation, you may enter questions into that module, and we'll either answer them in real time or reserve them for the Q&A period after the presentation. If you have a question and have called in by phone, please reserve your questions until the end, and then you can raise your virtual hand by pushing *9. When it's time for questions, we'll unmute you and you'll be able to ask your question. For those of you who are joining us on Facebook Live, go ahead and put your questions into the chat, into the comments, and I will try to attend to those as quickly as I can. This presentation is being recorded and will be available online next week. Okay, and now it's my pleasure to introduce the Rio Corridor Plan team. Here we have David Benich, our project lead. He's our development process manager. David enjoys working with the engaged residents who care about their community and the opportunity to work on both urban development and rural protection issues within one locality. Rachel Falkenstein is our planning manager. Rachel loves working with her colleagues and community members. Kevin McDermott is another planning manager, and he loves working to make the community he is a part of one he is proud to live in. Siri Russell is Director of Equity and Inclusion. Siri loves working with the community of Albemarle County, the sense of connection between the people and the place. Those connections drive us to want to be better all the time. Here's Jason Inafuentes, Project and Policy Associate. Jason has enjoyed the opportunity to serve his community as an EMT, a member of several commissions, and now in the Office of Equity and Inclusion. Here's Daniel Heyer, a civil engineer. Nothing is more satisfying as a civil engineer than working to make your own community a better place. Daniel writes, since I live in this community and practice engineering in this community, working for the County of Albemarle is a natural extension of doing the work I am here to do. Kendra Patrick is an environmental engineer. Kendra loves working with the county on projects as they are organized and motivated to make Albemarle County a better place to live. Here's Ryan Cheney, an infrastructure engineer. Ryan enjoys working with the county's dedicated staff to create catered solutions for the complex environments we all use and care about. And here's me, I'm Serena Gruya, a public engagement specialist here with the county, and I love designing opportunities to bring people together, build shared understanding, and create meaningful solutions, and test out all my Zoom talent. Okay, now I'm going to turn on our monitors for all of our video participants, and we will get into what is a corridor plan. David, I'm going to turn it over to you, and I will get your video on as soon as you start talking.
Hey, great. Thank you, Serena. Looks like it's not starting quite yet, but I'll go ahead and get started. So what is a corridor plan? A corridor study and plan is a planning project that defines the relationship between typically a linear feature, such as a river, trail, or road, in this case a road, and the adjacent land. So for Briar Road, we're going to be evaluating that relationship between the Briar Road corridor and the adjacent lands and other immediate areas of influence. There we go. Roadway corridor studies are typically multimodal in scope, and that is the case with this study. This will be a multimodal study of the corridor. There is an emphasis on the recommendations related to the road corridor itself, although land use considerations are part of a corridor study. The emphasis will be on recommendations related specifically to the road corridor and right of way. The scope and outcome of this particular project is written to conduct an evaluation of the corridor, develop comprehensive design alternatives to serve as a guide for future development and infrastructure improvement projects, and to provide solutions to enhance the mobility and access for all users and all common travel methods, and traffic safety operational improvements that will best serve the future needs of the corridor. This plan will ultimately be adopted into our comprehensive plan and the Places 29 master plan, which is a component of our comp plan. And it will be used to guide decisions on improvements within the corridor. Next slide. Next slide, Serena. There we go. So why focus in on the Briar Road corridor? First of all, the corridor that we're studying, the primary focus area is from Park Road to the boundary of the recently approved small area plan. And that boundary is generally around the Glenwood Station Lane, Putt Place, which is the road named Putt Place. There are other areas of influence. The consultant will speak in a little bit more detail about the corridor and the area studied and some of the extensions of that area. But this is the primary focus of the study at this time. Most of this section of road is a minor arterial and carries a high level of traffic, 29, almost 30,000 trips in some locations. The multiple functions of the road serves, and its importance to the county and region's transportation network and economy make it a road one that is important for us to plan for. Those functions include carrying through traffic to the city and to other parts of the county and region, providing direct access to residential areas, businesses, other services and institutions along a roadway that's within the middle of one of our designated urban development areas. And it provides a corridor for pedestrian, bike, and transit services and modes. The concerns that have been raised about safety and function of this section of road include the high volume of traffic as noted and the speeds of traffic along the corridor. Poorly functioning intersections and entrances along the road, the crashes and pedestrian conflicts that are occurring and have occurred along the corridor, and what we believe is probably an ineffective and underutilized pedestrian and bike facilities. These concerns led the Board of Supervisors to direct staff to undertake this study. Next slide, Serena. So our approach to the project, first off, we've hired to work with the county staff, line and grade civil engineering. You met a few of the members in the introduction. And along with our staff in developing this plan, this project team will assess the county's land use recommendations and zoning characteristics of the area, existing traffic studies, and other available traffic data for the area. The team will evaluate the corridor against relevant access, management, and safety standards and best practices for transportation and land use improvements. Multimodal characteristics of the corridor will likewise be assessed against similar standards, criteria, and best practices. And the team will also assess and make recommendations on urban design, context, and character of the roadway corridor as well. Next slide, Serena. The project will take, we estimate, up to a year to complete. This slide sort of gives you a general time frame for that period of time, and we've kind of broken it into big, larger chunks of the process. The first discover stage being the corridor background and document review and assessment of existing conditions, which is underway. The consultant will be giving you a little bit of information that we've developed and they've developed to date for the corridor here shortly. A defining or vision stage would be next, where conceptual design alternatives and concepts will be developed and considered. Once the concepts and alternatives have been vetted, a third stage would be to actually develop the unified plan with recommendations for improvements. And the final major stage would be the approval process that we would go through with the Planning Commission and board. Information developed during these stages will be made available on our public project hub site for review and comment, and meetings will be scheduled to also present and discuss information with the public along these major stages that we've identified. One thing I'd, in closing, kind of like to point out is that our initial demographic analysis of this area reveals a corridor that's has a very diverse population regarding race, age, income, homeownership, and transportation service needs. We want to ensure to the greatest extent possible that this plan considers the perspectives and well-being of all residents and user groups, and that is reflected in the recommendations of this plan. Serena, I'll turn.
Thanks, David. And now we're going to have Daniel Heyer from Line and Grade share with us the current conditions of the Rio corridor. And I believe I stopped sharing. Is that correct?
Thank you, Serena. Give me just a minute here to get my screen in the right place. All right, great. I hope that was a smooth transition and everyone can see my screen and can hear me. If not, I hope someone starts waving at me here on my little video feed. So as you know, we're here to talk about the Rio Road corridor. And our time speaking this morning will be about introducing you to the corridor from an engineering perspective, sort of really a short summary of our initial due diligence, and to hopefully let you see the corridor how we've seen the corridor, but also hopefully to get your minds activated and potentially be able to ask some questions or share some insights you may have had that can help us understand the corridor even better. So we'll really be covering background information and known challenges today, and we'll do it in a simplified and short form manner. We'll cover project context and summaries of existing infrastructure, and then we'll talk through known challenges, specifically congestion, operational deficiencies, safety considerations, and the like. I would like to say that we have a focus area for this project, but like all, public work and public engagement, there's not a firm line in the sand. Our study is encapsulating of adjacent lands and adjacent corridors. We're trying to focus largely between Penn Park and the small area plan near the Fashion Square Mall. But again, it's not a firm boundary. It bleeds over in a number of different directions, kind of like life. So what we're going to do to start is we're going to kind of work our way down the corridor, starting close to the Fashion Square Mall or Route 29. We're going to back our way down as we get closer to Penn Park. And we're just going to look at some aerial photographs together and kind of explain some simple observations we've been able to make. As we work through the corridor and as you listen and as you look at these photographs, I'd like to encourage you to pay attention to what's happening at the margins of the road, or next time you drive the corridor to pay attention to what's happening at the margins of the road. These are often our best cues for how the corridor should respond to the built environment, or for the built environment to be planning as in a forward-looking way to how to be adjacent to the corridor in a healthy and responsible way for all the users. And I like to say, like all good social movements, change happens at the margins. So that's where we're going to start with our look at as we work down the corridor. So not surprisingly, here near the Fashion Square Mall and Albemarle Square Shopping Center, this is very much a commercial thoroughfare. It's a large street. There's a lot of throughput of vehicles. And as a result of that, it's currently very daunting for pedestrians, largely lacking a human scale or a public realm for pedestrians to feel like they should be there. But there's also some mature landscaping and some mature trees that are a great asset to the corridor, both from environmental stewardship standpoint, but also just creating interest and visual, barriers for vehicles to be aware of, like just, a constrained corridor. So there's good as well as challenging elements. As we back up the roadway now, here we are somewhere in between Old Brook and Huntington, adjacent to one of the church properties. And as you can see, even a short distance away, we've had a massive context shift. Here we have more of a suburban boulevard, still a lot of throughput of vehicles. I know personally, when I'm on this portion of the corridor, I'm prone to speeding. It just feels like I should be going faster than the posted speed is asking me to go. It just feels broad and sweeping and like I should be going closer to 50 or 55 miles per hour. There's not a lot of pedestrian activity here. There's not a lot of places for pedestrians to be walking. The topography is challenging on both sides of the road, and there's some utilities in direct vicinity as well. Again, backing up again, here we are approaching Greenbrier, and you can see yet again the corridor context is shifting. Here we have residential properties whose driveways come right onto the corridor. There's kind of an antiquated feeling of properties from a bygone era. There's the beautiful stone chapel. There's this, thrift shop that looks like an old home. So that there's kind of this, again, a context shift here, our third noticeable context as we work our way down the corridor. We're calling this more of a residential boulevard. It's still a large street. There's a lot of access points. Pedestrian activity is sparse. That's a common trait for most of the corridor. And the traffic volumes are still in this area about nearly 30,000 vehicles per day. So this is near Gasoline Alley, and I love that that road is called that, but I also love that it's really indicative of what we're seeing along Briar Road. You have this kind of, 4 or 5 properties in a row that are either, gasoline service stations, mini mart or quick convenience shops, a gas car wash. And my observation of this portion of the corridor, while it's commercial in nature, it's also very lopsided. You have on the right side of the image, gas stations and, commercial development. And on the left side of the screen, you've got residential properties whose driveways daylight into the corridor. But you wouldn't hardly know that because they've screened their property so heavily and they've almost wanted to turn a blind eye to the fact that they're directly adjacent to this roadway corridor. So this really, to me, is an interesting, context of the two different sides competing for what the corridor should be responding to. There's also a lot of pedestrian challenges in this portion of the corridor, specifically with so many entries and exits to these commercial centers. This is more of the newer portion of Briar Road, maybe about 10 years old now. And it's certainly more representative of a modern suburban boulevard with multimodal provisions for bikes and peds, but also the shared use path. And it's much more, more modern, I guess, compared to most of the corridor. We do see increased pedestrian activity, probably just because of those provisions of shared use paths and safer sidewalks. So this is a good example of a suburban boulevard that seems to be well distributed for each user group. Backing up yet again, now we are actually on Briar Road to the east of John Warner Parkway in front of Dunlora Forest. And again, this is yet another substantial context shift. And this portion of the corridor, really from John Warner Parkway all the way to the city, is representative of a rural character roadway that's transitioning to more of a suburban character roadway. And that's not hard to observe in this image on the left. To the right, you see this new suburban community. And on the left, you see what was a farm and will eventually probably also be more of an urban or suburban style development. So the roadway is mixed currently and is very much a transitional corridor in two terms. It's transitioning itself from kind of a vintage or antiquated use to more of a modern use. And it's also a transitional corridor in that you're leaving the city and getting into the county. And here before long, you'll be on a 4-lane portion of Briar Road. And finally, our final existing conditions slide is more of the same. It kind of shows, old on the left and new on the right, kind of symbolizing kind of this mixed corridor with different character traits. So, we are both responding to what's on the current margins of the road, but also being aware of what is coming so that we can guide design and development decisions to keep this corridor cohesive. You may or may not have known that this corridor is home to at least 13 transit stops. They're not easy to identify, even if you're walking along the corridor. This image on the left kind of highlights a bus stop directly adjacent to Greenbrier Drive. And I knew that a bus stop was there. I was trying to find the bus stop that was there, and I had a hard time finding the bus stop that was there. That's kind of the nature of transit stops along this corridor. That's certainly something we want to be paying attention to because it could be an interesting opportunity for creating traffic calming along the corridor, but also creating ridership growth for the transit service. The corridor is home to numerous intersections of various size and complexity. The intersection has 7 signalized intersections. A signalized intersection has a signal, red, yellow, and green. There's also intersections that are unsignalized and pose different challenges, whether it's making a left-hand turn from Belvedere onto Rio or trying to turn right into Huntington and almost getting rear-ended. So there's a number of different challenges depending on the context or the typology of these intersections, and there is a number of them along the corridor. The corridor does have bike provisions. That box is checked. Now, whether you feel safe in the bike lane or whether you actually want to use the bike lane might be a different story. But really, from John Warner Parkway all the way across 29, there is a dedicated bike lane. But as you can see from the 2 images, based on how that bike lane is, sandwiched in between the sidewalk and a gutter pan and narrow driving lanes, as you can see, this bus is having a hard time making the turn and staying within its lane, and also just kind of encroaching into that bike lane. And I have ridden my bike down this corridor, and it is a little nerve-wracking. It's definitely not for the faint of heart. So even though those bike lanes are there, they might not be getting the use or the demand, meeting the demand of folks who actually want to bike ride along the corridors because it feels cramped and a little unsafe. Sidewalks. Again, there is sidewalks along most of the corridor. And again, you probably don't feel safe walking on them. Or if you did feel safe, you might get confused sometimes about where to go. Here's an intersection in the photograph on the bottom left-hand side of your screen that if you were walking along the sidewalk and wanted to cross over to the gas station to get a sandwich at the sandwich shop, you might not exactly know how you're supposed to cross. It's not really predictable under what a pedestrian might expect to see when they are looking to cross the roadway. I'm certainly not familiar with triangular crossing patterns, and it certainly would leave me a little confused myself. So what you end up doing is jaywalking, and of course, that's always a good decision. And if you are walking down the sidewalk and you're pushing a stroller, well, you're going to hit some bumps in the road with vegetation growth and just kind of lack of maintenance. And so we're looking to make that a little more amenable for folks who actually do want to walk and feel safe. And it's worth stating that even if you did want to walk along the corridor, even getting to the corridor as a pedestrian could be challenged because a number of the feeder streets coming into Rio Road don't have sidewalks either. So again, kind of looking at those small and the larger pictures here, we want to see people walking. We want them to have a place to walk to, and we want them to feel safe. But even getting them to the corridor should be considered. A little bit of background information on why pedestrians may or may not feel safe and what we can be thinking about as a design team going into this. Obviously, with travel speeds along the corridor being at least 35 to 40 miles an hour in most places, should there be an accident between a pedestrian and a vehicle, it would probably not leave the pedestrian in good shape or alive, just based on statistics and speed data. So creating some space for pedestrians to be buffered or protected from drivers will be important. And also for drivers, you can't really blame them. The faster that their cars are going, the smaller their field of vision is because they're looking further down the road. And that's what these images on the right-hand side of the screen try to indicate. And that's, as we're thinking through how drivers and pedestrians and bicyclists interact, these are certainly things for us to be thinking through in we're proposing design solutions. Most of you probably know, or at least are a little aware about the number of studies that have happened in the vicinity of the project. And that's really why we are here talking about this right now. There's been the Rio 29 Small Area Plan, which had a traffic component, all the way down to studying roundabouts along Rio Road. private development along the corridor. There's been so many people who have looked at the traffic counts and the traffic volumes and the turning movements along this corridor, but to date, it has not been done in a cohesive and unified manner. And that's why we're here. We're here to evaluate all that has been done and bring the pieces together to create a corridor that responds accordingly to the numerous users and developments and people passing through, looking both at current conditions and future conditions, and try to wrap it all into one cohesive and unified design understanding to guide future development and funding opportunities for projects the county might decide to proceed with. So we are going to take a very brief break, and this is where I messed up yesterday. So I'm actually going to back out of my screen, and I'm going to give control to Serena so that she can lead us in a time of polling.
Thanks, Daniel. So now we have an opportunity for you all to participate. And the question we'd like to ask right now, and I just launched a poll, is what would you most like to see along the corridor? And I'll read it out so that folks listening on Facebook or via phone can hear the options. So the question is, what would you most like to see along the corridor? The options are more environmental stewardship, more retail destinations, more public spaces, more safety improvements. And if you are listening on Facebook Live, you can go ahead and type those into the comments there. Again, the answer is more environmental stewardship, more retail destinations, more public spaces, more safety improvements, and you can choose more than one. So I will wait a few seconds for you. Looks like we have about 23 people participating so far. Thank you. About almost up to 100%. I'm going to end the polling here. Let's see. All right, and here I am going to share the results with our viewers in Zoom. It looks like 59% selected more safety improvements, 24% selected more environmental stewardship, and 5 people, 17%, said more public spaces. Thank you for participating there. All right. And I think
thank you, everyone.
To share, is that right?
All right, I'm gonna try to jump back in here. There we go. All right, I learned from my mistakes.
Okay.
Great. Okay, so we're gonna transition now for a few moments to talk about known challenges. We're not gonna cover all of them. There's probably too many to mention, but we're aware of a lot of them, and we're gonna begin to discuss them. We're gonna talk about congestion and the level of service, operational deficiencies, and then safety considerations, which apparently, based on this poll, everyone or most people are interested in. So this will be good. Stepping back for just a moment to at least introduce a few definitions so that the rest of the talk makes a little more sense. What do we mean by level of service? This is sort of a common term in traffic engineering. And really what it is it's a comparison of volume to capacity. A roadway was designed to handle a certain volume, or an intersection was, and what is the capacity that it needs to carry? And so all of us have experienced the levels of service all the way from EA to F. A good correlator is your blood pressure, or if you're having to explain to your children why you just use that word, that's more of a level of service thing. And what do we mean by operational deficiencies? Operational deficiencies are some component of the corridor or multiple components of the corridor not operating in the way that they were intended. Or in the case of this corridor, in many cases, having to operate in a way they were not intended, which can also lead to an operational deficiency. So again, we're going to work our way down the corridor, top to bottom, north to south. Even though Briar Road is an east-west road, it's actually almost exactly north to south through this corridor. So if you're confused by that, we are going north to south on an east-west road. Weird. Starting at Old Brook, Hillsdale, Rio, this 8-way intersection, if you will, is a very unique condition. I'm referring to it as an 8-way intersection because I don't really know any other way to. They're so close together that they actually function as one intersection. And that closeness, that proximity of these two intersections being so near to one another has contributed to so many of the problems that you're aware of. It's the crashes, it's the inadequate turn lane lengths and the backing up. It can lead to confusion of drivers, like, am I supposed to turn right now? Am I not supposed to turn right now? Or someone who goes through one intersection only to make a right-hand turn at the next intersection and gets rear-ended because they weren't expecting the car in front of them. You know, it's kind of a little bit of a cluster. And a lot of that's just due to the intersections aren't spaced properly, and we know that. The lanes are also very narrow. These are the narrowest lanes along the corridor, at about 10 feet wide. The sight distances aren't adequate. So this intersection is worthy of some focused attention as we consider the corridor as a whole. Gasoline alley. Again, gasoline alley in the metaphorical sense, not the actual road, just kind of the strip of gas stations. This is where we're seeing an immense amount of vehicular accidents, shown by that image kind of in the middle of the screen. All of those little speckles of yellow, green, and orange, and white and gray are cataloged accidents from VDOT. And again, this is not surprising when you have so many entrances so close to one another, 8 entrances in less than 1,000 feet. This is almost inevitable. And it's sad because it is affecting people and their safety and their livelihoods. And so this is something that we're going to want to be paying attention to increase the safety of the corridor. This is both an operational deficiency because, you know, it's not operating properly, but it may have never been designed to operate more effectively, which is a lot of what we deal with when we're trying to retrofit antiquated infrastructure. I'd also like to note that as a pedestrian walking across all of those commercial frontage properties, that pedestrian is exposed, I think, to vehicle collision almost more than they're protected by being on a sidewalk. It's just a remarkably unsafe environment for cars and pedestrians. So what do we mean when we talk about access management? Because that is going to be something we talk about a fair bit through this process. Access management is simply a design control or a technique that we implement based on trying to guide access between an adjacent land use and a corridor. And that access management technique varies based on the type of road. Access management for 64 is different than access management for 29 or Rio. So it'll be responding in kind to the roadway. Here we are, we're moving further south. The camera position is now rotated 180 degrees. We're looking back toward Belvedere. And here at Belvedere, the Belvedere intersection has some interesting challenges, mostly related to level of service. Believe it or not, analytical data have suggested that folks trying to make a left-hand turn from Belvedere onto Rio in the evening could be delayed as much as 8 minutes. Maybe one of you listening is one of those people, and if so, I'm sorry. That's a long time to wait, and I would be utterly frustrated by that too. We want to improve that condition, and also this is also a site of numerous crashes. So this intersection is not operating at its best, and it's not serving the users at its best either. So we're keying in on this intersection. John Warner Parkway, this is a very big intersection with a lot of traffic. And in the morning and in the evening, it has a level of service that is on the lower end of the spectrum. Remember, F being the worst, E being second to worst. This intersection is beyond the capacity, and it's borderline unstable, and that's resulted in very long queue lengths and high turning movements. So this is an intersection that, and the county is aware of this project. This intersection has been proposed to be retrofit with a roundabout, which I think, it has been selected in the smart scale process to receive funding. So and that's why we're studying this. We want those improvements to integrate well with the plan of the corridor as a whole. So this is, I'm almost done. I'm going to leave you with a few things to think about as we kind of close out. So when we talked about access management, we actually did not just look at pictures, but we ran some data points. And what we've discovered is that, if we overlay data of access management compliance on a graph and a relative scale, we see that there's certain areas of the corridor that not only are very non-compliant. So the brighter of the red circle, the greater the degree of non-compliance. And the larger the circle, the more of those conditions exist. And you can see Gasoline Alley and Hillsdale are two areas of the roadway that are just flamingly ready for some kind of improvement. They are really not compliant. That, again, we just discussed why, but even from running the data points, we're seeing that. I'm also going to overlay accidents. And so here's the accident overlay. Again, the size of the circle is representative of more accidents, and the color of the circle represents the severity of those accidents. And so we're seeing more severe accidents down near Hillsdale, but we're seeing a lot of accidents at John Warner and even along Gasoline Alley as well. So what's really interesting, though, is when you overlay the two, and you might not be able to see this too well, but really if you overlay those two maps on each other, so the access management and vehicular areas, we're starting to see that several areas of the corridor are ripe for safety improvements. Again, what we're hearing from your polling is that's an important consideration. And if that is a very important consideration, these are two areas where along this corridor, our study should result in improvements that reflect, improving that safety at those intersections. So again, we're not just looking at this in a touchy-feely good look at these pictures, but we're trying to get data points to resolve around these items to promote us moving forward in a technical manner of how to improve them. And so I'm going to end my talk now with kind of this value statement. There's a lot of people on this corridor, as David mentioned. There's a lot of people of different backgrounds and education levels and income levels. And the important thing is for each of us to be able to identify what our values are and to share them, but not to let our values be in competition with one another. I mean, this roadway serves everyone. It is a common and shared asset to our community. And we want to hear everyone's take. We want to create an ecosystem of feedback to where everyone can feel free to share their values and their experiences. We can receive that and respond accordingly. So with that, I am going to end my time presenting and pass it back to Serena.
Thanks, Daniel. Well, I think, oh wait, you're going to stop sharing here. And I think we should all just take a breath. That was a lot of technical information. And I really appreciate the detail that you went into. I also wanted to share that this video is being recorded and will be available to view at your leisure next week. And just to also remind you that this is a year-long process, and we're going to have a lot of time to learn together and to share our experiences and to really dig into the content and to make some choices together. So just sit with that for a second while I start to share my screen here. And hopefully I'm going to do it correctly. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about ways that you can get involved with this process. Thank you, first of all, for being here today. You are already an observer. You are here and attending an educational program. Observers will also receive email updates. We'll share the project hub and the location where you can sign up for updates here in a minute. There's a variety of ways you can participate. So if you want to kick it up a notch and become a contributor, you might participate in meetings, asking questions and sharing your experience. Again, that project hub is going to have questionnaires that you can contribute to and share comments on. If you can be an ambassador, if you're a part of a group or an organization, perhaps an HOA or a church that you think might benefit from hearing about what we're doing. Or if you want to have some meaningful way to contribute, we'll hope you serve as a project ambassador. Because transportation planning is such a complex topic, and because we know that many of you have different professional expertise, we're hoping to recruit some of you as technical experts that you might be able to share your knowledge and expertise in different ways to help inform this project. And finally, we are looking for some dedicated individuals to join our work group. This role really requires a higher level of engagement and participation throughout the year. We recognize that you might fit into more than one role, or that your role might change at some point. For example, if you're an observer and as time goes on, you really want to get more involved, and that would be great. The one exception is with the work group members. We're really hoping to have a consistent set of people working with us throughout the year. And we do want to have representation of all the different sections of the corridor. There's a lot of diversity along the corridor, so we're really hoping that we can have a lot of different voices sharing your experience and expertise. And here you'll see our Project Hub website, and the address is publicinput.com/RIO corridor. Our videos are going to be stored here, information about the project that you can sit with and take in at your leisure. Upcoming events will be listed here, as well as the different phases of the project. And I'll direct you to the Discover phase, which is what we're in now. We have a questionnaire associated with that, and we are going to have a lot of opportunities for you to share your ideas and your expertise with us. And so for those of you who want to continue to be contributors, I'm going to launch one final poll. And this poll is centered on learning. So as a community, we're going to, again, come together and explore some topics. This question says, what topics would you like to learn more about? And again, you can choose more than one. The options are transportation planning, design options for transportation corridors, how transportation projects are funded or implemented, urban forestry along transportation corridors, how climate action might align with transportation planning, case studies from similar localities, or something else. Again, we're looking to create a community learning series around topics that are of interest to you. And so this poll is going to help us kind of start to think about what kind of speakers we might bring in and what kind of topics we might cover. And thank you for participating. Design options for transportation corridors, that's a big hit. We're going to be sure to focus on that. All right, seems like most of you have finished your responses. I'm going to close it and share the results for all of you watching in Zoom. All right, and then I'm going to stop that. I'm learning here as we go. And now we are going to open up to a question and answer period. And I am looking, I don't know if we have any questions right now. Oh, we have 2 questions. And so I'll ask my project team to turn on your video if you are about to answer. Our first question is, let's see, what is the difference between public spaces and safety improvements when it comes to sidewalks and bike lanes?
I'll try to add a little clarity to that. I almost wonder if that question was asked during one of the polling times, because that seems like it was specific to maybe selecting our first poll question.
That's a good point.
And maybe the shortest answer is they're not necessarily mutually exclusive. Safety improvements could be something for a pedestrian. It could be a high visibility crosswalk or a buffered sidewalk. A public space could be both of those. It could also be a nicer bus stop. It could also be a little pocket park. It could be a green space that's a flower meadow, which is kind of what's happening already naturally in near the Rio-John Warner intersection. So they might not be mutually exclusive, but they might be different as well. So hopefully you were able to answer that question effectively. Sorry, we're a little late on that.
Yeah, I agree with that. Things like treed lawns associated with bike paths or median crosswalk areas, safety zones not only create safety, but they can add to the amenity and character of the area that create a good positive public space. So the next question.
I see, so the user SLR typed assumptions about corridor post Fashion Square Mall. I think that's going to be some creative thinking. I don't know if anyone wants to tackle that statement, or SLR, if you'd like to clarify your question there, maybe retype it in the form of a question.
I'll jump quickly into that. I don't know that we've made assumptions yet. I do think, like Serena was saying, we're curious if you have any ideas. There is the intent that Hillsdale might be rerouted and pass through more adjacent to the Fashion Square Mall. So it's certainly not, it's certainly within our field of view. As to what assumptions the Fashion Square Mall might become, I have my own, but we will certainly be taking that into consideration as we move forward. But I don't think we've made solid assumptions at this time.
And the assumptions about the land use would be generated through the small area plan process, which generally calls for more of a mixed use development area and a basic assumption of a more internal network that provides better access to those larger lands as they redevelop. So we will be taking those future assumptions that are the land use plan identify for that area and see how they fit for those corridor improvements. So.
Thank you. We're still going through a Q&A. I just wanted to shift the screen there so those of you who are going to leave us a little early have a chance to see the public input hub page. We're going to get into the next question, which is, do you take into account development underway in the corridor as well as outside the corridor, such as Brook Hill or North Point, that will increase traffic along the corridor? Thanks for your question.
I guess I'll take that question. And the answer is yes and no. Yes, we're taking into account as much as we can. I hesitate to say firm things like it will increase traffic. We know that it probably will, but there's also, you know, the option for people to make decisions about how they get from wherever their origin point is to where their destination point is. You know, they may or may not go down the Rio corridor. They might use Hillsdale to hydraulic. So the answer is yes and no, and that's part of what we're trying to do. Is we're trying to use these developments that we know are underway or coming soon to be able to project how the intersections will handle that increased volume. So we're both trying to look with what we currently know, and we're also trying to plan for conditions that we know include growth. And it's sometimes specific and it's sometimes ambiguous.
All right, and the next comment we received is a comment more than a question. The commenter says, I'm glad to see you note that the Belvedere-Rio intersection is a problem, even if the accident history is not as bad as, for example, Rio/Hillsdale. As Belvedere grows in housing and Saka and the center at Belvedere usage grows, that area demands a significant improvement. That is noted, thank you. And I will take the next one, and the question is, when will the public input survey results be published? Well, the beautiful thing about the public input website is that you can see the results live. So if you participate, you can actually see what everyone else has, how everyone else has responded. But as we conclude each specific survey, we will publish the report as soon as we close the door on answers there. And then the next question is the possibility of funding for sidewalks for nearby neighborhoods that are cut-through roads, Huntington, for example, as well as the possibility of speed changes?
Yeah, I'll take that one first, and if anyone from the county wants to follow up. I do think the feeder streets, Huntington being one, Old Brook being another, we should be aware that it's hard to promote people walking along Rio if they can't even walk to the corridor safely to begin with. We're certainly aware of that. As for funding of those sidewalks, I think this is the time for that to be raised and for that to be prioritized so that the county is aware of it. Regarding a speed change, that's a little bit more of an interesting topic. I don't know the success of being able to change the speed along Rio Road. I'm presuming you want it to be slower. And the best way to achieve slower speeds is actually to design a corridor that promotes vehicles to travel at slower speeds. I don't think the posting will change. And I think to be able to change the posting, you have to be able to prove with data that the average speed has lowered. And again, so that's a design thing. And I think we can introduce design constraints that make drivers feel like they need to be driving slower as opposed to drivers like me who are prone to speeding along the corridor because it's just so wide open. So I would encourage you to make your voice heard and get the county aware of that. Funding sidewalks on the side streets is really important. As far as the speed change, we're going to try to control that through design.
Yeah, let me just add a little bit more about the funding, because what Daniel has said is correct. I think this type of study and planning process helps us identify deficiencies, that the importance of them, so that we can, and the board ultimately can prioritize where limited funds should be allocated. So it's an important step, and it's something that we do need to consider. I also feel compelled to put a reality check on where we are in the county in terms of providing sidewalks. We've done a pretty good job trying to catch up, but we have an awful lot of deficiencies in our sidewalk system that we need to upgrade, and those are on some of the larger roadways. So neighborhood streets, with the funds that we have available, it's going to take a while to get to all the deficiencies that we have to catch up with, and we'll do the best we can. But in terms of funding from state sources, local streets don't tend to score as well as other streets that are collector or arterial streets. So it takes a much greater commitment of local funding to get those roads built. Again, input and studies and public input into what's important to them always helps in decision making on funding, but I do think it's important to understand we have a lot of improvements to make in a lot of areas of a very large county, and we're doing our best to do that. And neighborhood streets are not the highest priority for state funding, just quite frankly. So it takes a much greater commitment on the local level and funding to get those built.
Thank you, David. We have a comment that reads, the barriers around available space for expansion of pedestrian bike transit areas seem really steep in places. For example, Gasoline Alley. Daniel, how might you respond to that in terms of design?
Well, we are also aware that the barriers for expansion, and specifically in Gasoline Alley, is very challenged. Space is very tight. I will say I think we have a few ideas to bring to the table, but we're leaning into that process now. We have not started to put a lot of pen to paper to design the solutions. I do think there is a solution. I do think that we're going to explore a couple of different options of what that solution might look like. But we are also in agreement with you that that area is deficient. It has an operational deficiency, and because space is so constrained, it will be a challenge. But that's why we do what we do. We're gonna work that challenge to find an agreeable solution that increases the safety for pedestrians in that area. It's a very scary area for a pedestrian. So I don't have the answer yet, but we're gonna work toward it for sure.
Thanks. This next question is that, and it looks like we have two more questions. What are the required steps and requirements necessary before a new traffic light is installed? And they're specifically at Rio and Belvedere, so you might want to tackle that.
Yeah. Well, remember how we talked about how the intersections at Old Brook and Northfield, Hillsdale were so close together, and that created an operational deficiency? Well, I haven't measured it yet. I'm initially suspecting that the intersections of John Warner and Rio and Belvedere and Rio are also technically too close for two signalized intersections. So that signal at Belvedere may or may not be something that is even permissible. We can look into that in more detail as we begin to work through the engineering process. But see, because Belvedere is so close to John Warner, you're already experiencing that deficiency with those long waits to make a left-hand turn. So in some ways, we have to allow the zone of influence of the two intersections to understand each other, and whatever solutions we bring to solve the two different problems at the two different intersections, we don't want to push the problem to the other intersection. So one of our design goals, and we've already been discussing this with county staff, is how to actually make the operations of those two intersections harmonious, because just putting in a roundabout at John Warner will make Belvedere much, much worse. So we want to actually be cognizant of how these two intersections play off of each other.
Thank you. And our last question that's come in is, how do you deal with pedestrian crossing at traffic circles? When you are a pedestrian and you come up on a traffic circle, what do you do?
Yeah, so this is a great question. I'm glad it was asked. Thank you, Jennifer. There's a couple different ways to answer that. First of all, for a traffic circle, the pedestrian crossing place is pretty specifically defined of where that is located in relationship to the roundabout or the circle itself. It's usually about 25 to 30 feet away from the circle. And that allows for a car to exit the roundabout and actually be able to stop and not stop flow within the roundabout and allow a pedestrian to cross. That said, generally speaking, crossing through a roundabout is much safer for pedestrians because the distance for which they're exposed to a vehicle is much shorter, and there's refuge islands built in. So you could think about trying to cross the intersection of John Warner and Rio Road now. That's like a 65 or 75-foot walk across 4 lanes of traffic, and you're exposed the whole time. Whereas within a roundabout, and maybe you've seen the pictures of a dual lane roundabout, but within a roundabout, you're only crossing maybe 22 to 24 feet at a time, or if it's a single lane roundabout, only 12 to 14 feet at a time. So your exposure to a conflict with a vehicle is much reduced. And so while it might seem a little unorthodox, the nature of a pedestrian's crossing at roundabout is much safer. Finally, I would say vehicle speeds at roundabouts are much slower. And so should there be a conflict between a pedestrian and a vehicle, the pedestrian is much more likely to survive. And that was sort of indicated in that graphic I showed with the people who were red and white. And well, you don't have to explain which one was surviving and not. But a vehicle moving slower, for example, a car navigating a roundabout, should it impact a pedestrian, the pedestrian is much more likely to survive. So it's actually a much preferred situation.
Great. And we have one final question. Any plans for the historic Free State 1-lane bridge? Many Belvedere neighbors use Huntington to cut through, and traffic has significantly increased. David?
Yeah, if the question is about right now existing plans, there are not any plans to close or enhance that access. With the approval of the Belvedere development, it was expected that it would be retained as a second way of access into Belvedere, at least for that distance between Rio Road and that crossing. So there are no plans to close, widen, or change that in any way at this time. I think it's probably a component that we need to be aware of in the study and its impacts, and I suspect that Daniel might be seeing some of the results of that at other intersections as he looks at information. But in terms of where we are now as a county, I'm not aware of any plans to modify that connection or crossing.
Okay, thanks, David. I'm a pitch person for this project hub, but I'm going to say it one more time. Please make your way over to publicinput.com/Rio Corridor. We really appreciate your time today and sticking through this very technical presentation. And we do hope you'll join us along the project journey. And with that, I hope everyone has a wonderful rest of your Friday.
Thank you.
Bye.